This is Cultish Tendencies 14 and will form the first of two parts focusing on a meeting that took place in Leeds on the 18th of October 2002 between Abu Iyad, Amjad Rafiq and the cult cohorts from Leeds. And this particular meeting included a brother called Abu Sulaiman Sajjad ibn Abdul Rahman, who was the focus of criticism throughout this meeting and had to respond to clarify particular points and accusations that were levelled against him. And before going into the details of this meeting, it's important to highlight that this became a trait of the cult in which they would summon or meet with individuals they considered susceptible or vulnerable to their machinations to force confessions, apologies, or admissions regarding supposed wrongdoing. As has been established throughout these cultish tendencies and other recordings I've delivered, the cult, as cowards as they are, could only choose and focus on individuals they considered weaker than themselves. They soon realised that Sajjad was not such an individual. And this again is a trait and a pattern that's been established by entities, cults and otherwise, when they feel threatened by others who are not according or adhering to the dictates that they have implemented amongst individuals. And I want to refer to some historic events to highlight the point that's being made here. This browbeating, this castigating, this witch hunt attitude that the cult implemented against a number of individuals. Thankfully, those who saw this and were not intimidated, and who the cult themselves were very wary of, never had to endure this. And if they had attempted to do this with such entities like Brixton, for example, they would have had it thrown back in their face, metaphorically speaking and literally. So the historic references I want to give, highlighting the type of behaviour, as this will set the premise for this particular episode and the second part that I intend to do, were one being the Spanish Inquisition of 1478. And just summarising this briefly, in that year, the Catholic monarchs began the famous Inquisition to purify Catholicism in all their territories. The Inquisition was established to act as a tribunal to identify heretics and bring them to justice. So that was the Spanish Inquisition. And those listeners who are aware of such recordings that I'm about to go into of the 18th of October 2002 will see the parallels between the cult methodology in this regard and the Spanish Inquisition. And then if we look further on in history, the Salem witch hunt and trials of 1692. And this was in America, and the context were that trials would be fueled by residents' suspicions of and resentment towards their neighbours, as well as their fear of outsiders. And you had children lying and saying that they were having fits and violent contortions and uncontrollable outbursts of screaming due to some bewitchment of by particular protagonists, one could say. So, for example, 3 accused witches were brought before the magistrates and questioned, even as their accusers appeared in the courtroom in a grand display of spasms, contortions, screaming and writhing. So that happened on that occasion. And while the meetings that the cult conducted were not as dramatic and illustrative as we see in the Salem witch trial, all the same you had an accuser who would be making such accusations against a particular individual or individuals, who would be sitting there and subjected to these accusations. And you would have one of the cult leaders or a group of the cult leaders sitting, listening and arbitrating, or supposedly arbitrating, but it was almost a foregone conclusion. The cult never speak against each other. So Abu Iyad Amjad Rafiq was invited to this meeting on the 18th of October to preside over the meeting and discussion and hear the claims and counterclaims. So again, before I go into that, I want to refer to something even more recent as we move along through history to the 1940s and 50s. And it's a more common term that's known as McCarthyism. And this was a practice that was implemented amongst the US Senate at the time, of making accusations of subversion or treason without proper regard for evidence. Without proper regard for evidence. And so these three historic events are something that the cult embodied and continues to embody in how they question and check individuals who they suspect or who they feel threatened by. We have examples of some graduates from Medina, from their own city, coming back, returning from the University of Medina and being informed that unless their propagation and dawah was within the confines of the cult, that they would be shut down, they would not be able to give that dawah. And this harks back to the Jimas days when Abu Muntazir, who was at the helm, would do similar with others, that if they were Salafi, they couldn't be doing dawah or producing books or anything like that unless it came under the so-called auspices of Jimas. So we can see clearly where Abu Khadija got this blueprint from. He was one of the last into Jimas as it was disintegrating, and so he learnt some of these traits and tactics undoubtedly from Abu Muntazir. Referring to the meeting now, however, the cult member who introduced the meeting was Abu Sa'ad Intizar, and Intizar was such an individual that Abu Khadija even gave a reference or ijaza for him to be the representative of the cult in Pakistan. That's 2002. By 2007, as is the trait of the cult, Intizar was no longer speaking in favour of them, and they were opposing him also. He made accusations that they destroyed the dawah in Leeds by 2007, 5 years later. But turning to the meeting now, again on the 18th of October, Intizar opens that meeting. He's the first narrator, and it starts to explain in a very superfluous way why the meeting was convened. And by 4 minutes 29 approximately, Abu Iyad interjects and apologizes for, or asks to be excused for interjecting regarding this individual called Abu Fadl. And he mentioned that it depended who spoke to Abu Fadl and who he spoke to, that he would express different teachers. So they would ask him who he'd studied with, and he gave many different teachers and many different answers to whoever it was that he was speaking to. And we only have to pause here and compare that today with the cult leader, Abu Khadija, who, when asked about who he learned from, who he studied with, the answer is very spurious indeed, because he hasn't either gone abroad to study for any length of time, and he didn't have any shuyukh who were his teachers. So we see similar parallels. It's funny because what goes around comes around, as we know, and you've got here in 2002 Abu Iyad speaking, rightly so and questioningly so, about Abu Fadl and who he studied with, but his own cousin was in the same boat then and now, 2020. Intizar went on to speak and said how he and Basharat, another cult member, had left Abu Fadl early. They were one of the first to have left, and that the main individual giving dawah at that time was Brother Ilyas Karmani in Bradford, and he used to give lectures in Leeds University. So the narrator, Intizar, said that he used to attend those circles. Around 5 minutes and 28 seconds, Intizar speaks about the dawah and that Ilyas was the main individual in that region, that area, giving the dawah, and that Abu Fadl and brother Ilyas Kermani never really got on with each other, as Abu Fadl was the new kid on the block.
This is the time when our brother Ilyas was in Bradford, was doing the circles in Leeds University as well at that time. And these are the circles I used to go to. Either I would go with Abu Fadl when he was giving his lessons, when Sajjad would be translating sometimes in some lessons, or I'd go to a university where Ilyas would be giving these circles. So that time, I remember Ilyas was the one who was giving the dawah in Bradford and Leeds was Ilyas. He was the one who would go all around and give the dawah. So this individual Ilyas, we saw that when Abu Fadl and Ilyas, they never got on with each other. Obviously because Ilyas is the one who mostly was in the dawah in Leeds and in Bradford, and Abu Fadl just came. So then he started his politics that obviously we wasn't aware of because we was new to the dawah. But as time has tell.
By 6 minutes 37 seconds approximately, Intizar highlights how a dispute arose between Ilyas Kermani and Abu Fadl about where the latter had studied. And Abu Fadl had actually brought some documents to show or provide evidence where he had studied, but this was very unclear. Intizar mentioned they'd also heard Abu Fadl had given a khutbah in Brixton, but when they checked with us in the late 90s, it was confirmed that he hadn't given a khutbah at Masjid Ibn Taymiyyah, and in fact it may have been a small centre down the road which was owned or run by Takfiri inclined individuals. Then he goes on to state around 8 minutes to 8 minutes and 6 seconds that Abu Fadl had started teaching Aqidah Tahawiyah, and he speaks disparagingly of him at that point, highlighting that none of the scholars mentioned starting teaching with this book, and he referred to some of the books that the ulama said a student should refer to when teaching a new study circle.
I can't remember the book, exactly the book of Tawheed that he started. Can you remember which book he taught us?
Tahawi, Sharh, Aqidah Tahawi.
So he started with this deep book, Allah Musta'an. So we know the ulama, none of the ulama mentioned that we start with Aqidah Tahawiyah, rather we start with Rasul al-Thalatha, Qawaid al-Arba'a, Rasul al-Sitta, and these books that the ulama mentioned. None of them ever mentioned Aqidah Tahawiyah, that we start with this book first.
And that's quite a key and poignant highlight from Intisar at that particular point, because when you juxtapose that again with the cult leader, Abu Khadija, the Abu Khadijite founder, you'll see that Abu Khadija's main book and reference was Barbahari Sharh Sunnah. So he rightly highlighted the books to proceed with when teaching, and it shouldn't be Aqidah Tahawiyah. But also, the question should be asked, can it be Barbahari Sharh Sunnah? And the answer should be resoundingly the same. Absolutely not. Sajjad speaks at around 10 minutes and 13 seconds, and he states that many issues need to be discussed first. And he highlighted that an individual called Talib Abu Abdullah, or Talib Abu Abdullah, was the one who first introduced Abu Fadl, saying that he'd studied in Medina, and he'd met him in Leeds 6 Masjid in 1995.
Except when I told you it was in 96, 6 years ago.
My brother, the issue is not about the date, it's the issue.
No, it's very important.
If I'm speaking about,
Intizar, brother.
Do
you know why it's very important?
I'm speaking, can I explain
because
something?
When Abu Fadl first came, and you neglected to mention this, I was sat in the mosque in Leeds 6, and that was in 1995. And it was after Maghrib, and I turned round and there were 2 Egyptians there. I didn't know they were Egyptian, but there were 2 people there. And one of the brothers, Talib, and you all know who Talib is, Abu Abdullah, the one who we call when we have a problem with the jinn. Talib Abu Abdullah, he came and he said, this brother has studied in Medina and he is going to teach you, he's going to start lessons. So Talib Abu Abdullah is the one who first introduced Abu Fadl to the other brothers, because we had no knowledge of him until he first introduced him.
Sajjad further concedes at 27 minutes and 27 seconds approximately that he had made mistakes, and he said, quoting him, "No way do I have the arrogance and the ignorance and the stupidity that I'm going to come here today and I'm going to say that everything Abu Fadl did was correct. And quoting him verbatim again at this point, 27 minutes and 54 seconds, he states, I'm not from amongst people, or I'm not from amongst the people who, if he makes a mistake afterwards, he goes to the end of the earth to defend it, close quote. And I want to repeat that again, because when we look at the lack of humility from some of the cult members, and of most recent, Abu Iyad, regarding the allegation of Prophet Sulaiman teaching magic to the Jews and not conceding that he had said that and accepting that he'd made that mistake, the humility shown by Sajjad would be a good reminder for everyone, and the cult in particular, because they were the ones who had him sitting there in this grilling of a meeting, or their perceived grilling of a meeting, to hear his words again. And I'll quote them. I'm not from amongst the people who, if he makes a mistake afterwards, he goes to the ends of the earth to defend it. Very poignant reminder. At 28 minutes, and between that time and approximately 32 minutes, the discussion and conversation ensues about how Abu Fadl adversely affected others, leaving a damaging effect amongst the brothers in the community. And others started subscribing to the beliefs of Sayyid Qutb, praising Sayyid Qutb as a reformer and everything like that, which obviously is clearly wrong and reflects going astray on anyone who's doing that. Now, Intisar then explains why they are judging Sajjad, because he remained close, allegedly close to Abul Fadl. But before moving on to that next point regarding that issue of closeness or not to Abul Fadl, that individual causing damage amongst the Leeds brothers in the community is something to be genuinely concerned about. But then we only have to look now from 2002 up to 2020 to see the damage that the cult has done, not just in a community like Leeds, but across the UK and in other countries as well. Undoubtedly so, with the number of individuals that are coming forward, brothers and sisters, highlighting the damage, and the scholars as well. And we'll touch upon the scholars very shortly. Intisar then mentions at 32 minutes, 10 seconds approximately, again, look at how Abul Fadl, and I'll quote him, look at how this man speaks about the ulama, close quote. I'll repeat again, Intisar says at 32 minutes, 10 seconds approximately, quote, look at how this man speaks about the ulama, close quote. But we had already emails and evidence of the cult speaking disparagingly of the Lajna. For example, we are aware of Abu Khadija in that well-known and publicised email now, which I've highlighted in Cultish Tendencies, where he speaks about Allama Ali Hassan al-Halabi, and we wait for the Lajna to correct its mistakes. That was in 2000, I believe. So while Intisar is speaking about whoever this individual was, Abu Fadl, and that he speaks disparagingly about the ulama, we only have to look at what the cult were doing themselves at the time and what has transpired since that time then. Let's refer to a recent event of how they've had an unceremonious falling out with their longtime Sheikh and scholar, Sheikh Mohammed bin Hadi, and how they speak concerning him. We can refer to the myriad of other scholars who they speak disparagingly about, who were once with them and they were once with. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And when you are upon guidance, when you are adhering to the manhaj properly, there wouldn't be such contradictions as what we're seeing now from 2002 right the way up to where we are now. Continuing. At 32 minutes, 30 seconds approximately, Intisar continues to speak and highlight again, quote, how Abu Fadl has destroyed families or split families. And we only have to pause and see what the cult has done throughout the last 20 odd years. It's been exactly the same as this individual that he is highlighting and the damage he's done to Leeds. Again, I reiterate, this has been much more far-reaching when it concerns the cult and the damage that they have implemented and wrought across communities. At 35 minutes onwards, after raising an allegation in which Sajjad spoke negatively about Abu Usama al-Dhahabi and the refutation that he did of Sheikh Umar Abdul Rahman, the blind sheikh, Intizar then is insistent to clarify that now there are mistakes with Abu Usama 6 years on, and he wants it to be clear for the record that he's not endorsing him. There was this paranoia which was not relevant to the discussion, but this is how anal the cult members are, and that they want to clarify every little point to justify and exonerate themselves. So in case they are blamed, in case they are chastised, in case they are written off, because their be-all and end-all is to be seen in a good light in the eyes of the cult leaders. And even Abu Iyad highlights that this is an unrelated issue and questions whether it needs to be addressed at that particular point. Moving to a very key point of this audio, at 40 minutes and 50 seconds approximately. And Abu Iyad gives a very revisionist cult version of the history of Salafiyah in the UK. And I will quote but paraphrase some of what he has said here. And he pauses and then says, just for the benefit of the people who are sitting, it's good to make them realise the benefit in this and what's actually taking place, which is that, going back to some of the points Sajjad made earlier, is that when you look at the history of the dawah in this country, let's say from 1990 to the situation we've arrived at now. At the beginning, many people thought we were actually Salafis or on the Salafi dawah, and that's not true. There was no one upon the Salafi dawah in the sense that they were upon the Salafi manhaj, the clear, pure Salafi manhaj, the dawah as it should be done. Rather, what we had at that time were people like Jimas, Abu Muntazir, and people like Abu Aliya. That was a dawah that had aspects of confusion in it, and some of the thoughts of Abdul Rahman Abdul Haqq. The clear Salafi dawah didn't emerge up until 1996 and onwards, when some of the sheikhs came from abroad, like Sheikh Mohammed al-Madkhali, al-Anjari, Abdus Salam Burgess, and others. Prior to that time, when these sheikhs came, there was no clarity in the dawah at all, prior to 1996. So since that time, 1996, to the time we've arrived at now, the link with the scholars has increased, or have increased further and further, and more clarity has been obtained about the clear methodology. Close quote.
In the bookshop, when I went there, I emphasised this aspect of following the way of the Saleh.
You haven't clarified them to what's happened from the man before. How you can explain to them about the manhaj of the Salaf?
Brother,
when you haven't clarified to them what the issue happened in the first place.
And I went and I explained it to them.
My brother,
just as I explained it on every.
My brother, we're on about the issue.
You know what your problem is, or you know what your problem is.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Is that you're going. What you're doing is.
I think there's a misunderstanding between. Just for the benefit of the people who are sitting here, because obviously we don't want to make it look as if, you know, this is just like a problem and issues being raised for nothing. Just so that people understand what's going on, I think it's good to make them realise the benefit in this and what's actually taking place, which is that going back to some of the points that Sajjad made earlier, which is that really in this country, when you look at the history of the dawah in this country, beginning from, let's say, 1990 to the situation that we've arrived at now. At the beginning, many people thought that we thought that we were actually Salafis or upon the Salafi dawah, and that's not true. There was nobody who was upon the Salafi dawah, in a sense that they're upon the Salafi manhaj, the clear, pure Salafi manhaj, and the dawah as it should be done. Rather, what we had in that time was people like Jimas, Abu Muntasir, and people of that nature, Abu Ali, and people like that. And that dawah at that time was just a dawah that had confusion in it and aspects of some of the thoughts of Abdul Rahman Abdul Haqq, and so the clear Salafi dawah didn't emerge up until 1996 and onwards, when some of the sheikhs came from abroad, like Sheikh Mohammed al-Madkhali, Sheikh al-Anjari, Sheikh Abdul Salam Burgess, and others, and they brought out certain issues that we in this country were not really aware of, issues which had affected the dawah greatly in the Arab lands, and issues which really they brought in certain ways of thinking from the innovators into the ranks of the Salafis. Prior to that time, there was no clarity in the dawah at all. From I'm talking about 1996, prior to 1996. So since that time, 1996, till the time that we've arrived at now, you found that, generally speaking, the link with the scholars has increased further and further, and there's been more and more clarity about what actually is the proper, true Salafi methodology.
Now, it's important to focus on this revisionist version here, because, for the record, in 1990, those who were attached to Brixton Mosque, for example, had converted, like myself, and were receiving Salafi dawah from Salafis like Surat Abdul Malik, rahimahullah, and being directed to Sheikh Ibn Baz, Sheikh Uthaymin, Sheikh Al-Albani in 1990. If anyone is uncertain about this claim and assertion that I am making now, please refer to Chronicles of UK Salafism, an insider perspective from the year 1990. Then you can listen to year 1991, 1992, 1993, up to 1996 to see the evidence, because the archival documents are still there with me, and the cassettes showing that not only were Brixton members on the Salafi dawah, but they were also on the manhaj as well. Welcome to the Chronicles of UK Salafism, an insider perspective. This is hopefully the first of many podcasts that intend to provide a chronology of how Salafism developed in the UK, but from a convert and insider perspective. And what I intend to do is to provide evidence, documentary evidence, historical evidence that actually focus on what was being taught and learned during the 90s, and then proceed into the 2000s. And the reason for preparing such podcasts is to counter, as well as address, a prevalent narrative now that Salafism continues to be a precursor to non-violent and violent extremism. And that narrative has been adopted by governments, academics, practitioners, and even other Muslim entities that have been at odds with Salafism and Salafis for decades now. Now, why was the year 1996 mentioned? Because up until that point, Abu Khadija had previously not been Salafi, as has been highlighted. He was not around in the early 90s. And Abu Iyad Amjad Rafiq himself had only started coming to the Dawah Salafiyah around 92, 93, after he had met individuals in Essex University. And he was very committed to learning Arabic and had the nickname Maududi, as he knows. So it's convenient to bring it to 1996 because it's when they start emerging with Oasis and the like. Before that time, we had students of knowledge who were students of Sheikh Al-Albani attending Jimas conferences and connecting with the individuals. And some of the now cult members used to travel out to see them. Abu Yahya Abbas, Farhat Abbas, for example, used to go out and visit the Jordanian Shuyukh as well. So again, here is evidence to contradict that very erroneous account that has been given by Abu Iyad at that particular point of time. And the evidence is there. And we only have to look now. They're citing Sheikh Mohammed ibn Hadi al-Madkhali, who was one of the scholars, Al-Anjuri. Abdul Salam Burgess has since passed, rahimahullah, and they mention others. But when we fast forward to 2020, we see that these scholars and students of knowledge, Sheikh Mohammed ibn Hadi, Al-Anjuri, are no longer amongst their coveted scholars. So the question will come now, was it the manhaj that they taught at that time? Because now they're astray as far as you're concerned. So what was it that you were learning at that time? Was it manhaj or was it not manhaj? And if it was manhaj, then Was the issue manhaj now that you're astray? Some will say it's very easy. Sheikh Mohammed bin Hadi went off the manhaj later on. Really? We're pause at that point and maybe move back to the audio, because there's enough evidence that's coming out about that whole issue, which I don't need to elaborate upon any further.
Over 77 in Sudan, in Maghrib, in Libya, in Tunis, in Jazair, in Saudi, in Mecca, Medina, Jeddah. Over 77 of the people of Sunnah, and not just the people of Sunnah, the best of them, speaking against the people of Sunnah without evidence is nothing but dhulm.
So the point now, again, is from 1996, the manhaj became clear, and the methodology, that is, became clearer and clearer, and there's more clarity. So the question is, how come the cult is no longer with a majority of the scholars and students of knowledge they were with? They're with fewer than a handful, maybe 2 or 3. How come the cult leaders are now calling themselves sheikhs? Have they now surpassed the scholars that they are no longer in communication with or in agreement with? That those are no longer sheikhs because they don't call them or by the epithet sheikh anymore, but they call themselves sheikhs. So the question now is, in 2020, 18 years later, after Abu Iyad gave this revision, are they now scholars and sheikhs surpassing the very sheikhs that they were referring to back then? So these are questions that are there. And Abu Iyad's point, people gained prominence in the time of uncertainty, like Abu Muntazir, Abu Alia, Abdurrahim Green, Sheikh Suhaib Hassan, Bilal Phillips. And let's just stop here for the moment. Let's refer to Sheikh Suhaib Hassan. Sheikh Suhaib Hassan was given tazkiyah from Sheikh Ibn Baz to travel to Africa first to give the dawah, and then to move to the UK. Sheikh Suhaib wanted to complete some studies in the UK, and it was endorsed by Sheikh Ibn Baz. When I was in Medina and invited to Sheikh Abdul Muhsin Al-Abad's house in 2002, May I believe it was, he referred to Sheikh Suhaib Hassan again, to the chagrin of one of the cult members who graduated from Medina, who tried to speak disparagingly about him, and he was shut down immediately. And Sheikh Abdul Muhsin said that Sheikh Suhaib is the scholar in the West that should be referred to. That was in 2002. So let's contrast the statement of Abu Iyad, bringing Sheikh Suhaib as one of those around in the time of uncertainty and that he'd gained prominence. Now, Sheikh Suhaib was given prominence first and foremost because he got tazkiyah from Sheikh Ibn Baz. And in 2002, May 2002, when I was on Umrah in Sheikh Abdul Muhsin Al-Abad's house, he referred again in front of one of the cult members who was visiting as well, that Sheikh Suhaib was the scholar and that he should be referred to in the UK. That's 2002. Abu Amina Bilal Phillips, Dr. Abu Amina Bilal Phillips, and Sheikh Abu Amina Bilal Phillips, we can call him that title, especially when you've got those who are undeserving of such a title, namely the cult members using it, and his status and stature amongst the West and the Western-speaking Salafis, English-speaking Salafis, was established. And you cannot compare the cult with the works of Sheikh and Dr. Bilal Phillips. And a quick point here. They targeted individuals that they felt could be targeted, and they knew who were not necessarily continually running backwards and forwards to the scholars to validate themselves. And that's what got the cult where it got to in the sight of some of these scholars, these few scholars, is that they kept going backwards and forwards to obtain validation. Nothing more, nothing less. Continuing. Also, one of those who they continued to hold claim to and was at that point the best among them, but he left them before he passed away, rahimahullah. The question then comes, so up until 1996, Abu Talha, Dawood Burbank, wasn't on the manhaj and wasn't on clear Salafiyah? That question has to be put back to them as well, because Up until 1996, Abu Talha was one of the main individuals highlighting and driving the Manhaj Salafiyah. And I still have some of his handwritten notes from translations regarding books from the scholars, regarding some of the hadith collections, Abu Dawood, for example, and his comments pointing, highlighting, and his speech when we used to sit with him about the manhaj. So up until 1996, if this statement is to hold any weight, it would mean that the champion amongst them, the former champion amongst them, the former best individual amongst them until he left them and then passed away on the way to Hajj, rahimahullah, Abu Talha was not upon the manhaj. And I don't think anyone, any Salafi will say that in their right mind, unless they belong to the cult, of course. Sheikh Ahmed Dahir Awais was also in the UK at the time. Sheikh Ahmed Dahir Awais was teaching in Brixton from the mid-90s. Sheikh Ahmed Dahir Awais was a student of Sheikh Rabi', and those cult members know that very clearly, like Abdullah al-Ahmami, Abdul Razak al-Sanani, because when we sat in Sheikh Rabi's home around 2002, 2003, I was sitting there, Abdullah al-Ahmami was sitting next to me when we were having our disputes and asking the Sheikh to clarify matters. Abdul Razak was there as well, and we were sat in front of the Sheikh, or kneeling in front of him. And when Abdul Razak al-Sanani tried to intimate some negativity towards Sheikh Ahmed Dahir Awais, Sheikh Rabi stopped him and said in front of us, he was a student of mine, and he stopped them from speaking concerning him. And the only thing he said, and we have to be honest and open here and transparent, was that he was concerned that he wouldn't speak about the Abul Hassan issue at the time. He was just worried that that would catch up with him if he didn't speak. That's all he said. But he censured anyone from speaking about Sheikh Ahmed Dahir Awais, saying he was a student of mine. And not only was he his student, but when he used to be at Sheikh Rabi's house, the Sheikh would ask him to teach his children sometimes as well. The Reading individuals who were once upon a path other than the cultish element that joined them to Salafi publications, the Abu Khadijites, like Naveed, for example, from Reading, he also confirmed that Sheikh Rabi asked them, do they know Sheikh Ahmed Dahir Awais? They said yes, he has circles in Brixton. He asked them how long was the journey from Reading to Brixton. They said about 45 minutes, and he insisted that they attend the study circles of Sheikh Ahmed Awais. Why is there an elaboration on this particular point now? Because of that revisionist account that the manhaj and Salafiyah was not really practiced until after 1996. Yet we had a student of Sheikh Rabi' in Brixton. Yet we had Sheikh Ibn Baz endorsing and still speaking about, alongside Sheikh Abdul Muhsin al-Abad, about Sheikh Suhaib Hassan. I've already highlighted that Surah Abdul Malik was in Brixton and taking us for lessons from the moment we took our Shahada. The Jordanian Shuyukh used to attend conferences from the beginning actually, 93, 94, throughout the 90s. So this revisionist account is untrue. It's an arrogant attempt by the cult, I won't say to whitewash, but to brownwash history so that they can say that Salafi Dawah started properly with them, which is far from the case. What started with them was a new level of cultism amongst Salafiyah in the West that had not been seen or witnessed before. At 44 minutes, Abu Iyad then refers to Sheikh Abu Anas visiting in 1995 and his comments regarding them needing to clarify issues to avoid being seen or aligned with the Ikhwanis. And this was another element where he was saying about the manhaj not being clear until after 1996. What Abu Iyad fails to mention is that Abu Anas also stressed to them, and we got this from them, Abu Khadija and Abu Hakim and the others when they used to come down to Brixton, that Abu Anas stressed to them to stick with Brixton, Masjid Ibn Taymiyyah, because the Brixton Masjid in Taymiyyah are with the scholars, especially as he saw the Jordanians coming regularly to us. And he highlighted that to them, and they were the ones who confirmed that with us. And around that time, we were about to have a conference, and Abu Anas was in the UK, the Jordanians were with us, and they met. And I remember Sheikh Ali Hassan speaking very highly of Abu Anas and describing him as a sulb. And I asked what that meant. He said it's a nail. He said he's like the nail in the wall against the Hizbis and the Ikhwanis. His dawah is very strong against them, and that's why he used that term favourably. Proceeding to 58 minutes of the meeting, and Sajjad asks, what does Intisar actually want him to do? Because Intisar kept pushing in one direction, moving in another direction, and it wasn't very, very clear. And Sajjad was speaking about something 6 years prior, and Intisar wanted to move on to the next issue without clarifying what it is he actually wanted. That went backwards and forwards for a while, and it was around, again, Abu Fadl. The clarity wasn't there, but then Sajjad said, what you're asking for now, I said I will give at the beginning. I gave it about 10 minutes before, and you are continuing to go forward. And what was actually taking place is that every time Sajjad spoke with clarity and strength of purpose, Intisar tried to move on to something else, waffling, searching for other things. He basically just wanted to condemn Sajjad, but it wasn't going according to what he was planning and the purpose of the meeting in the first instance. And you could hear the frustration of Intisar at that time.